All right, we're going to keep the knowledge coming. Our next panel is called Cannabis Deconstructed, and our next speaker is a neuroscientist with more than 20 peer-reviewed articles and publications. He is the founder and CEO of MediTaurus. Please give a warm welcome for Mr. Dr. Jokūbas Žiburkus. Y'all on. Jokūbas Žiburkus.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Alex and ICBC organizers, for doing this great meeting. This is my third opportunity to share some knowledge and to challenge our thinking at the ICBC. The first time I joined ICBC in 2016 in Vancouver. I was here last year in Berlin, and it was so good that we all decided that we should be back here again this year. And it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Jokūbas Žiburkus. I know it's easy to butcher it. So I go by Dr. Z, and my student's favorite is Dr. JZ. So without further ado, I'm going to talk about cannabis deconstructed, and I'm going to tell you some of the thoughts that I have about cannabis. And before we start talking about cannabis, we can start talking about constructing the human body system that is called the endocannabinoid system. We all mammals have endocannabinoid system, even some more primitive animals and creatures that live in the sea, they also have the endocannabinoid system. The endocannabinoid system is very complex. It is widely distributed throughout the body. So it is not just found in one location. It is essentially found in almost every cell in our bodies. And if you look at this chart, what it shows you is cannabinoid receptors, cannabinoid receptor 1 and cannabinoid receptor 2 are distributed differently in different organs. And our bodies produces endocannabinoids. So we generate ourselves cannabinoids as needed, and thus, we sometimes need supplement of cannabinoid that comes exogenously as well. So endocannabinoids, the major ones are anandamide and 2-AG, or arachidonyl glycerol. And these endocannabinoids will bind cannabinoid receptors. Cannabinoid receptor 1, CB1, is mostly expressed in the brain. Also, and this is the effect of cannabis or THC, but you will also find CB1 receptors in liver, in the digestive system, in kidneys, in bladder, so it is widely expressed throughout the body. CB2 receptors are more expressed in the organs and cells that are related to the immune response, and it is widely distributed throughout the body. The first boost of the endocannabinoids and engagement of endocannabinoid system happens with birth and with suckling. It is something that makes you hungry, that makes you eat, and only after you eat you get a boost of dopamine, which gives you the satisfaction for eating. But something makes you go eat, and it's probably the endocannabinoids, because this is one of the functions of endocannabinoids. They modulate pain and stress, immune function, appetite, memory, inflammation, thermoregulation, and metabolism. And phytocannabinoids, such as THC, for example, are similar in structure to anandamide, and thus they will bind the same receptors as does anandamide. And this interaction here is pretty complex. You can think of phytocannabinoids or cannabinoids binding to the receptors in a key and a lock-like fashion. However, it is not that simple, and several cannabinoids, for example, THC and CBD, will bind the same receptor. Therefore, the receptor, which can be represented here by a door, and the function of the door is to be open and closed appropriately, the function of the receptor to be activated or deactivated appropriately. And in order to engage this endocannabinoid system and receptors, multiple molecules have to bind to these receptors, and multiple locks exist on these receptors in order to regulate properly the function of these receptors. Now, if we look at what happens in the brain and also what happens many places in the body, this is a simplified example, which is still complex. But when neurons are active, what happens is neurons produce a lot of electrical positive charge that is called depolarization. That depolarization allows for calcium to influx and allows for the neurotransmitter vesicles, that are chemicals that signal in our brain and body, to be released in the synapse between two neurons. Now, the release of these neurotransmitters and increased excitation and depolarization, and in particular I'm talking here about glutamate, the excitatory neurotransmitter, on demand will then produce the synthesis of endocannabinoids. These endocannabinoids are not stored in the vesicles, and they will cross freely through the plasma membranes, will travel retrogradely, and will bind CB receptors. The CB receptors are located on neurons, but the CB2 receptors, as well as CB1 receptors, are also located on other type of brain cells that are called glia, that are also very important in information processing and brain function. So it's a system where endocannabinoids are synthesized on demand, they pass through the membranes, and they activate CB receptors. If there is no control of glutamate, you can have glutamate excitotoxicity, you can also have calcium excitotoxicity, and CB1 receptor activation turns off the influx of calcium and regulates the release of the neurotransmitters, thereby balancing the excitatory inhibitory activity, not just glutamate, but also gamma aminobutyric acid, or GABA, in the neuronal synapses as well. Now, in the brain, CB1 and CB2 receptors, again, are expressed in many different structures. And you can see that this is CB1 receptor that is abundant in structures such as hippocampus, for example, which is responsible for learning, memory, and stress, but also in the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for executive functions. It is also expressed in the brainstem that controls some of the vital functions. Interestingly, the opiate receptors in the brainstem are expressed in the part that controls the breathing. Therefore, it is easy to die from opiates and have an overdose by shutting down the breathing centers. And the cannabinoid receptors are actually located in the areas nearby in the brainstem that control nausea and vomiting, but they are not expressed in the breathing centers. Other receptor targets, so endocannabinoids do not just bind CB receptors, they target other receptors, and it explains the multitude of functions and the multitude of effects that people are seeing from either one phytocannabinoid or the group of phytocannabinoids in the case of extractions and isolates of cannabis. TRPV1 receptor is very important. This is your sensory afferents. It's the receptor that essentially mediates analgesic functions or pain. So endocannabinoids target TRPV1 receptor. They also target PPAR, or peroxisome proliferator activated receptor, which is involved in tumorigenesis, metabolism, development, self-differentiation. It also targets GPR55, which is a protein coding receptor, but its physiological function is not completely known. The whole idea, it's a massive and complex regulatory system. It's a homeostatic regulatory system that has multiple targets, multiple receptors, and is expressed throughout the body. So to engage the endocannabinoid system, you have stress, you have trauma, you have hyperexcitability in the tissues or in the brain, you have inflammation, and the response of the endocannabinoid system is eat, make you hungry, go eat, rest and sleep, get drowsy and sleep, forget, because it's important to forget things. Forgetting is an important part of the survival. If we remembered everything, we would be overloaded mentally, psychologically, and also protect. Neuroprotection by controlling neurotransmitters, and also a significant role in gastric protection and regulation of the digestive system. Thus, endocannabinoid system is regulating our body, which is teetering constantly between excitation and inhibition. It is a finite system, our brains and bodies. It's a sensitive system, but it is balanced, more or less, between the interactions of the endocannabinoids, a multitude of neurotransmitters in our bodies. The endocannabinoid system, again, can be modulated, and we can talk about how we can modulate endocannabinoid system. So the first thing that comes to mind, of course, is synthetic pharmaceuticals, such as synthetic THC, that has been on the market for many, many years. Interestingly, synthetic THC, that's pharmaceutical, is on Schedule 2 and on Schedule 3. And THC, that is natural from the plant, is a Schedule 1. One substance is actually listed on 3 schedules. The justification is that there are additives added into these medications. However, there are no proof that these additives are working biologically independently or making THC, that is synthetic, more effective. So we have therapeutic approaches to modulating endocannabinoid system. Of course, we can modulate the synthesis and the degradation of endocannabinoids, and a lot of the synthesis happens through this molecule called FAAH. We can modulate CB1 and CB2 receptors. We can have supplements with exogenous phytocannabinoids. We have to remember that when we talk about phytocannabinoids and supplements, we're not just talking about smoking cannabis and rolling joints. The fastest growing demographic of cannabis users are baby boomers, and they are very interested in many different preparations of how to use cannabis, and a lot of times they don't want to necessarily smoke cannabis. Reports of cannabis positively modulating mental and physiological processes are beyond anecdotal. I always tell this industry needs to stop saying that this is an anecdote as an example, because when you go to any medical meeting, these anecdotes are actually clinical studies. But when it comes to cannabis or cannabis use, they become anecdotes. Now, there's thousands of anecdotes. We all know that the research has been restricted and is still restricted on cannabis. Not on synthetic cannabinoids, but on cannabis, and it's very limited. And therefore, there may be inconclusive evidence, and you can set your own stringency level and factual information that you involve in this decision to make whether the cannabis is effective medicine for certain things. Now, let's deconstruct cannabis. So we just talked about the endocannabinoid system, and we deconstructed the system into receptors, into the endocannabinoids, and the distribution of the system throughout the body. Now, let's deconstruct cannabis, because cannabis as medicine has been reported by Chinese Emperor Shen Nong and is written up in the Peng Cao Qing, which is the first book of herbs, essentially of herbal healing. And the emperor was growing cannabis and using it for medicinal purposes and was really trying to understand what kind of cannabis is being grown and what it can be used for. So all of the action in cannabis in the plant is in the cannabinoids and in the terpenes that are mostly located in these very beautiful trichomes on the plant. There's approximately 3 different types of trichomes that are different by size. And these trichomes will contain, these glands will contain the cannabinoids as well as the aromatic molecules. Let's talk about something else. Let's talk about some basic misconceptions that exist about what THC cannabis and what distinguishes really hemp or industrial hemp from medical or adult use cannabis or recreational cannabis. And the only thing that distinguishes the two is THC. Of course, there are differences in the way the plant itself looks, but the only real difference is the expression level of THC. So if you look at the industrial hemp, cannabis sativa, cannabis ruderalis, by regulators, the amount of THC, it's set at 0.2% in Europe, but not in every country. Switzerland has it at 1%. Why? Who regulates 0.2, 0.3, 0.5%, or 1%? Nature does. Because you can have a certified seed and you can have a certified plant that is supposed to have 0.2 or below level of THC, but with certain grow condition and maybe more sun, all of a sudden can jump to 0.4, 0.5% THC. And in fact, a lot of farmers that get punished for that, they have no way of controlling it. They have done everything right. They can't control the nature because the plants are grown outdoors. And naturally, industrial hemp plants actually like to have 0.5 to 1% THC. High THC cannabis is sativa and indica, and mostly hybrids now that are in the market. The highest percentage of cannabinoids that these plants can express is up into the 30% of THC or CBD. That's simply just limited by the genetic material and genetic mechanism of production of these molecules. So there is a finite limit. There is no plant that can produce 65% of THC. it will all get cut off around 30–35%. Now, what I really don't like is when people call synthetic cannabinoids synthetic marijuana or synthetic cannabis. I have a whole article written on this, and I encourage you to find it, my name, and if you look up synthetic cannabinoids. Synthetic street cannabinoids, or so-called labeled as synthetic marijuana, is not cannabis, is not marijuana. It is dangerous, it should not be used, it should not be accessible, and it is widely accessible. It is designed in the lab, it is designed by what I would call evil scientists. Most of them are in China and Eastern Europe. It is essentially putting chemicals together and mixing them together to get to a powder-like form that looks like powder, and then sprinkle that powder-like form on the plant material, which can be tobacco or another plant material, label it as spice or kush, put incense on it, and put it in all of the head shops. And the government cannot keep track of it because new formulations, new variations of these cannabinoids, synthetic cannabinoids that are deadly and dangerous are coming out, and they're being released with different labels constantly. There's probably over 70 different variations of synthetic cannabinoids that are out there. They are addictive, they're dangerous, and they're deadly, and they have nothing to do with cannabis. This is hemp. It grows tall, and most of the high THC cannabis, at least it is bred to be below 3 meters in height or so. And I have to tell you that I found this picture recently. This is 1930s in Vilnius, which is the capital of Lithuania, where Lithuanians and Polish, it was then under the Polish control, the city of Vilnius, not only grew this fantastic hemp, grew this giant hemp that went all the way up to the 4-story tall limits essentially, but it was also the first botanical and medicinal fiber institute that was opened in Vilnius in Lithuania in 1930s, one of the first ones, and it still maintains itself in Poznan and has the second largest seed bank for hemp and cannabis. The largest bank for seeds for cannabis is in Russia. So we have this in our history in Lithuania. It's not just Holland, it's not just Bob Marley. Before Bob Marley was born, we were already experimenting, and we had a research facility for cannabis and textiles for cannabis in Lithuania. Now, cannabis consists of a diverse set of phytocompounds. Some people call it, and Lemir Hanush, one of the professors, that's my idol, 1,001 compounds, 1,001 molecules in cannabis. There's over 115 phytocannabinoids, a number of terpenes, about 120. By the way, analytical labs, the maximum they test for, I think, is steep hell. There's about 40 plus cannabinoid spectrum or terpene spectrum that they test for. So we still don't know a lot about these other 60 to 80 terpenes that are found in cannabis. Flavonoids as well as amino acids, omega amino acids. So it's a very valuable plant. We have to think about it from many different perspectives, not just from intoxication. And the other thing that's interesting about the plant is that this plant doesn't produce THC and doesn't produce CBD. It actually produces acidic cannabinoids. 95% or so, all of the cannabinoids that are expressed in the plant are acidic cannabinoids, such as THCA. THCA is non-intoxicating. So cannabis plant is actually non-intoxicating. It is heating or processing that cannabis plant or decarboxylation process that turns THCA into THC, CBDA into CBD, and so on. And THC then has the euphoric effect. So THC also is known as intoxicating agent, anti-inflammatory, neuroprotective, analgesic, appetite stimulant, antiemetic, anti-cancer. Is it all just good and dandy? Does it work for everything and make everybody happy? No, that's not the case. Cannabis is not for everybody. Cannabis is not for every person. It's not for every patient. Cannabis can cause anxiety, can cause panic attacks, can increase heart rate. There's low rate of addiction for cannabis, or cannabis dependency, we can call it, as well as this hyperemesis syndrome from high use or constant chronic use of high THC cannabinoids. It's emerging. It's this coughing and vomiting like syndrome in the morning which usually gets fixed by taking a hot shower or using capsaicin from pepper, which binds to TRPV1 receptors, because that's the mechanism that gets impaired in hyperemesis syndrome. So CBD is really the therapeutic champion of cannabinoids. It actually counteracts negative effects of THC. So it can be anti-anxiety and anti-panic attacks. It's antipsychotic, neuroprotective, anti-cancer, anti-addiction, anxiolytic, anticonvulsant, anti-emetic, analgesic. It does have negative effects, fatigue and drowsiness. We also have to pay attention to some of the latest literature from epilepsy that suggests that both THC and CBD could potentially be pro-convulsant in 10% of all of the studies. Okay, so we have to be cautious of these things. So CBD, cannabidiol, what it does, it blocks the enzymatic breakdown of the molecule FAAH, which synthesizes endocannabinoids. So it increases the production and presence of the endocannabinoids. It rapidly crosses blood-brain barrier. It's non-psychoactive, but I prefer to use non-intoxicating, because nicotine is psychoactive, coffee is psychoactive. Everything is psychoactive. Psychotropic is different, or intoxicating. CBD is not intoxicating, counteracts THC effects. There's a lot of evidence in human epilepsy with CBD, and lots of diverse case studies using CBD, THC, and also combination of THC and CBD. And what's emerging, at least from unpublished literature, is that this ratio of THC, CBD, and also from existing drugs such as Sativex, which is 1-to-1 THC and CBD, that this ratio of THC, CBD is also very important in different applications. Now, I urge you to look at this health effects of cannabis and cannabinoids that was published by the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. So where the brightest minds got together and reviewed all of the literature that's available, and this is what they decided, not me. There is conclusive or substantial evidence that cannabis and cannabinoids, cannabis in this case is cannabis, cannabinoids in this case are synthetic pharmaceuticals, or plant-based pharmaceuticals such as Epidiolex or Sativex. Conclusive evidence for the treatment of chronic pain, anti-emetic, improvement of patient-reported multiple sclerosis spasticity symptoms, oral cannabinoids. There is moderate evidence that cannabis or cannabinoids are effective for improving short-term sleep outcomes in individuals with sleep disturbances. Now you will see that there's also a lot of limited evidence that cannabis and cannabinoids are effective for THC, for Tourette syndrome, limited evidence that it is effective for traumatic brain injury, intracranial hemorrhage, limited evidence that cannabis are effective, symptoms ineffective for improving symptoms associated with dementia, and so on. So there is definitely proof that it works. There's also inconclusive evidence. And I think, again, we just need more science and more studies. One thing to keep in mind, of course, when we talk about addiction is a very complex process. It's intertwined with many different things. But if we look, cannabis addiction, cannabis has the highest scores, which is less addictive than caffeine, according to Benowitz ratings here. So the higher the score, the less addictive is the substance. And you can see that nicotine is a lot more addictive than marijuana, and marijuana can be less addictive than caffeine. So yesterday, politicians said that cannabis should not be consumed as coffee, and I just wanted to ask why. Because it causes a different intoxicating effect, but not from the safety standpoint. So from the safety standpoint, marijuana here, the lower the number on this side, and the lower the plant or a substance is on the y-axis, the lower it's on the y-axis, the less dependency potential there is. The lower the number on the x-axis, that means the dose, okay? So this is the active dose and lethal dose. If it is 1-to-1, that means that active dose, something that eliminates your pain, also kills you. It's a lethal dose. With cannabis, it's 0.001, which is 1,000 times of the active dose. So if one rolled joint gets you high, you need to consume about 1,000 in a matter of few minutes. which is impossible. It is easier to do it with caffeine, which is only 100 times more of the effective dose. And it is, of course, a big problem with other drugs, including opiates and morphine, where only 10 times the dose, including alcohol, only 10 times of the effective dose is lethal. So from safety perspective, cannabis could be argued that it is safer than caffeine. Now, we have a lot of overdoses from benzodiazepines. These are epilepsy drugs, mostly. And you can see the rise in these deaths. And there is thousands of deaths, from 1,000 deaths in 2002, 2015, 5,000 to 6,000 deaths from benzodiazepines. Pharmaceuticals. We have very high morbidity and mortality rate from opiates. So 73.8% of all prescription overdose deaths were due to opioid pain relievers. OPR, it's a study published by CDC. OPR sales nonetheless quadrupled between 1999 and 2010, and it cost insurers about $72.4 US in US annually in healthcare. So this is a report from 2011. Since then, I think we had a rise in opioid epidemic, and I think these numbers would probably look even worse at this stage. Now, deaths from cannabis, 0 reported deaths from cannabis. Opiates, of course, are used for the treatment of chronic pain, severe pain, and I looked at one of the studies, a prominent study, a Journal of Pain Research in 2017, a cross-sectional study of 2,800 approximately individuals, and they showed that about 1,248 of these individuals, 48% respondents reported using cannabis as a substitute for prescription drugs. And the most common classes of drugs substituted are narcotics, about 36%, anxiolytics or benzodiazepines, and antidepressants. This is what the patients report themselves. So it's not a very stringent study, but it is something that is being reported, self-reported by patients, and it is looking really substantial. This is not the only study, but I don't have time to go over other pain studies. There's another pain study in Canada that showed a similar result of people dropping opiates and switching to cannabinoids. Now, in the plant, again, we not only have cannabinoids, different set of cannabinoids, but we also have terpenes. Terpenes are the aromatic lipophilic molecules. It's what gives cannabis a different smell. A different strain of cannabis smells differently. One may smell like lemon because it has limonene. Another may smell like lavender because it has linalool as a terpene in the plant. These aromatic molecules, they easily cross blood-brain barrier. So when you inhale terpenes through your nose, it actually goes into your olfactory system and crosses through the blood-brain barrier. It is not just smell, it actually has biological and physiological effect. And if we look here, D-limonene is being used as potent anti-cancer, anxiolytic, and immunostimulant. Beta-myrcene, which is found in hop and mango, is potent anti-inflammatory. Alpha-pinene is acetylcholinesterase inhibitor, or SIN, which acts in the same way as Alzheimer's medications do, which are acetylcholinesterase inhibitors for the most part, except for memantine. And linalool has analgesic, anxiolytic, and anti-inflammatory, anticonvulsant properties. So these molecules are biological and physiologically active. Beta-caryophyllene is probably one of my favorites. It has anti-inflammatory and gastric cytoprotective activities, as well as it serves as CB2 selective agonist. These terpenes are not just found in cannabis, and beta-caryophyllene is very prominent in hops, for example. It is also very prominent in Lithuanian hemp. And the products actually that we have here, made from Lithuanian hemp, I'll tell you about them in a minute, they're loaded naturally with beta-caryophyllene. So there are certain strains that will have a lot of beta-caryophyllene, which is CB2 receptor agonist. Again, it's involved in immune system modulation. And it's very important to keep that in mind. So because of these different smells, we have what we call the entourage effect. So first you smell things, and it has a certain association for you. It's a pleasant association, it's a good memory, or maybe it's something that you should stay away from. So first you estimate your cannabis flower, especially by smell and by look. But it doesn't mean that that's going to be the physiological effect that it causes, because it all depends on the components and the molecules that are found in cannabis and their groupings. Now, the names are kind of interesting. This has been challenged, Gorilla Glue. I think it's out now as Gorilla Glue, off the market. But you know what I find really interesting, and I think it hurts the market, is when fun names introduce like Purple Monkey Balls. And I think that that's kind of a wrong approach, and that's what gives cannabis industry a little bit of a bad rap too. And that's a problem. I think the strain should indicate something about the condition, something about the feeling, at least in some way associate with the source, with the location where it was grown, but not just some crazy name because a lot of younger people would go for it. And I think it just spoils for everybody. So cannabis entourage effect comes from the sum total of synergistic as well as antagonistic effects. Remember, CBD is slightly antagonistic to THC effects. Multiple targets throughout the body are targeted by a collection of terpenes. So when terpenes and cannabinoids come together, they kind of work in unison in one fashion. They facilitate absorption or delivery of active ingredients. They counteract or minimize adverse side effects. And whole plant phytocannabinoid extract compared to phytocannabinoid isolates will have a lot of phytocannabinoids, and the isolate is just a single phytocannabinoid that has been isolated. Now, endocannabinoids and cannabinoids are not just found in cannabis. So anandamide and oleamide are found in chocolate. You should challenge every person that doesn't know about cannabinoids or cannabis by telling them, do you know that you ate cannabinoids today or last night? They say, no, I didn't. How can I done that? How have I done that? I didn't do it. I don't do these things. But you ate chocolate, right? You love chocolate, so you got some cannabinoids in it. And people are very surprised. Truffles also have endocannabinoids. So people are crazy about certain foods. People will pay a lot of money for truffles, a lot of money for chocolate. And is it all just because of the taste? You have to wonder. So now we come to the human body, and human body processes this information in different ways. And there's a multitude of products that go through the human body. And so let's talk about different products, and maybe I'm going to jump a couple of slides if you don't mind. We can talk about, now that we understand different components such as isolates, such as extracts, we want to reconstruct cannabis into houses, into CBD oil, into protein powder, into food, and everything that cannabis has to offer. So let's look at these slides and make sure we understand this, that smoking cannabis is probably not the best thing, actually. Vaporizing cannabis is better. Oral ingestion of cannabis, you have sublingual chewing and swallowing. You have topical liniments of cannabis, and you also have suppositories. They all have very different effect, and the use of these cannabinoids and cannabis products will have a very different effect on the individual, and that's important to keep in mind. Another important thing to keep in mind and warn ourselves about is metabolism. So THC gets metabolized, and it gets metabolized into 11-OH delta-9 THC, and then through the secondary metabolism, it turns into delta-9 THC 11-oic acid. This 11-oic acid has nothing to do with acidic cannabinoids that are found in the plant, but this 11-oic acid is actually a more stronger intoxicant than THC, and that's why people have problems with edibles. When they're used to inhaling or smoking cannabis and getting the effect from it immediately, they expect the same when they try their first edible outside the airport in Denver. And half an hour later, they say, well, I'm not feeling anything, so let me pop a couple more. And by the time they pop a couple more, this 11-oic acid is already built up, and it is now acting as a double or triple intoxicant on top of the new THC coming into your body with additional gummy bear candies that you consumed. So that's very important to keep in mind, that the metabolism of the body is very important. So the other way that we view cannabis is mostly we talk about medicinal cannabis and smoking. I believe that cannabis and cannabinoids will find their way into the food chain. They'll find their way into the plates, and microdosing of cannabis can be found in the feed, animal feed, and that animal feed, and through the whole process, it can find itself on our food supply chain, on our tables. Therefore, to reconstruct cannabis, we have to understand and reconstruct the products. We have to understand the state of the endocannabinoid system, metabolic profile, psychological state, drug and drug interactions. We have to create products and then know that recommending these products, the doctors go by start low, go slow philosophy, that you have to know dosages, safety, efficacy, pollutants that are present there. Undoubtedly, third-party test results in clinical studies before these products can find their way into doctors, nurses, healthcare practitioners and be recommended either as food supplement or medical cannabis products. So all of these are very important. Now, we also have to know that there are contraindications. That cannabis, again, is not for everybody. Psychosis, use of strains with minimal or no THC content is recommended. In bipolar disease, there's an association between cannabis misuse and early onset of bipolar. 8% of general population is cannabis allergic, and there is a multitude of drug and drug interactions that happen through metabolism with cytochrome. This is something very important. This is metabolism of anti-epileptic drugs that is taken from Project CBD. And it's basically what these lines are showing, that if you combine any one of these bars, any one of these drugs with CBD, the amount of that pharmaceutical drug in the blood can mostly increase. In some cases it will decrease, but in many cases it will increase. And that's important to know, because you're essentially, by occupying the cytochrome P, which metabolizes CBD and gives CBD priority, now does not metabolize the pharmaceutical drugs. Therefore, there is a buildup of pharmaceutical substances in the body that can be twice, 3 times the concentrations, can lead to serious problems. Liver problems, liver compromise, as well as other effects. Now, cannabis, of course, we have different preparations. The best way to consume cannabis is through inhaling is vaporization. It's controlled temperature. Cannabis flower vape pen can be used for vaporization, concentrate, oil, or wax. Vaporization is often preferred, and that's because trichomes that contain the cannabinoids and the terpenes that I told you, they will melt away before the plant matter or the leaves and the buds will burn. There's less carbon monoxide, heat, and there's no smoke. And somebody will say, why would you ever want to inhale cannabis? Let me ask you this question. Where do we have the most surface area to absorb things into our bodies? Lungs. The second place is suppositories, anal or vaginal. They bypass the metabolism of the liver. They get absorbed directly through the lungs into the bloodstream, or into the bloodstream through the suppositories, and they're immediately into the blood where they can cross blood-brain barrier. Therefore, inhaling something can be very helpful for people that suffer from certain conditions. We also have to understand that there are isolates that look like powder, and it will almost look like a synthetic, right? But it is not. It is not a synthetic. It is actually an isolate from the plant. That's what a lot of people ask me. Wait a second, so is isolate the same as synthetic cannabinoids where you take and mix things together and then you get this powder? No, it's processing of the plant. It's extracting the plant, separating the molecules where you can get an isolate, such as CBD or THC isolate. Some of the products are raw. That means that they're non-decarboxylated, and they will contain acidic cannabinoids. And many products have been decarboxylated. So it's important to pay attention. Are these raw products or they have been decarboxylated? You're getting a different profile of the cannabinoids in these products. There's many oils that are being produced. Most of the tinctures, though, what you refer to tinctures with alcohol, but many oils are being used as carriers for either isolates or for the extracts themselves, such as olive oil, coconut oil, hemp seed oil, and glycerin. And as well, there's form of capsules that can be found. So many different products, many different uses. You have to know the test results. You have to know what is inside the products. You have to know where they're sourced, where they came from, how they were made, and how they found their way on the shelf. So for us to have individualized cannabinoid preparations, which I think is really necessary, they have to be individualized for a certain condition, and they have to be individualized for a certain individual, because that individual with a certain condition may be taking different drugs, may be having a different metabolic turnover. So we need to standardize the grows and the products. To standardize the grows, the biggest challenge is you have to have complete control of inputs that is going into the plant and complete control of outputs. You have to scan the plant, measure the plant, so that you can capture the same output, chemical output of the plant, cycle after cycle, which is a big challenge. To my knowledge, nobody has done it. If I am wrong, please correct me, but there is no standardized output from the plant. The same strain grown by the same grower, the same conditions, the two grows 40% in the composition of terpenes especially. Terpenes are evoked by stress, so it's a natural way for the plant to protect itself. And terpenes and cannabinoids, they fluctuate during the growth cycle. They go up and down. So it's important to capture the part of the cycle and the part of the output that is standardized what you saw in your previous growth cycle. So now you have the standardized grow and standardized plant. Now you have to standardize the products, make sure that the products are always the same. You have to then analyze databases and sure that you trace the patients that are using, are they getting good effects or not. So analyzing databases are going to be very important, gathering that information. We have to pay attention to liver metabolism and compromise of liver function. High levels of CBD can compromise liver function. Milligrams of CBD taken together with some of these anti-epileptic drugs. Warfarin, for example, will increase also blood thinner. And also, we have to think about a lot of drugs that we're using essentially. So liver metabolism is very important, and then drug and drug interactions as the liver metabolizes these is also very important. So in my opinion, science, anything goes in science, and you can really pave the way of the future. You can have bright ideas, you can dive in the deepest oceans or look at the highest mountains to find something and pave the way. And there's facts, and these facts need to be taken into consideration. The industry needs education. Industry needs a lot of education. I think that the biggest bottleneck in Germany right now is the healthcare practitioners and medical doctors, because they do not understand the products that are in the pharmacies. They do not understand why certain strain should be used over another certain strain. Why maybe low THC should be recommended for somebody that has inclinations or indications of psychosis. So there has to be a major destigmatization of cannabis, which can only happen through education. And of course, in medicine, to reach that medical point, we need to standardize the cannaceuticals. And cannaceuticals are different from pharmaceuticals. It's a paradigm change. So we all have to get used to the reality and how to interpret this paradigm change in the existing systems. So hemp cannabis saves lives and heals people and animals. So what are you waiting for? And it's not just for you, of course, most of you here know what you're waiting for. But what are other people waiting for? What are other politicians waiting for? The facts are in front of them. The reality is in front of them. What I wanted to say is meetings like this are really great. Because last year when we were at this meeting, we came together with people that came from different parts in the world. We met outside the meeting and we met inside the meeting. And I'm happy to tell you that fruition of this meeting last year ago is a new brand that our company MediTaurus is launching. It's Florence, and if you stop by, you can see the variety of products that we produce with hemp-based CBD in the United States as well as in Lithuania, in Europe. So these meetings, and Alex organizing these meetings, and all of the guys and the ladies promoting the networking is really valuable. I'm very happy to be here again, and I think I'm here because we formed a strong partnership. And it's also nice when you find the right people and the right partners where you can move things forward in the desired fashion. So these are our partners for Florence MediTaurus, and thank you very much for your attention.
One more time, Dr. JZ. Yes, indeed. We have time maybe for one question? Okay. Maybe if it's a question, but maybe closer to me. Okay, I'm on my way. I work with trainers.
Dr. JZ, why do some people not feel CBD immediately? I've come across way right away. What is it about people that they require different dosages?
So I know you as the person that asks the toughest questions in the audience. And this is, perhaps my answer would be, what are you supposed to feel with CBD? Because people are used to feeling intoxicating effect with THC. So the first few times they take it, and there's a certain feeling, maybe I should be feeling something like high or intoxicated, but that's not the case. And if you have no problems, if you have no anxiety, if you have no pain, if you have no nausea, acid reflux, or gastric problems, you may not feel that effect of CBD. Interestingly enough, the doctors in the United States are now suggesting prophylactic use of CBD every day of about 3 to 5 milligrams a day. Again, for what reason? Potentially to tame the increase in inflammation and the aging that happens just normally in our bodies. So it's a great question. I'm sorry I don't have a definitive answer for you. On the other hand, it definitely probably has to do with metabolism. Some people might metabolize it much faster, so they need higher doses. And also, I had a similar question where somebody asked me, when I smoke THC, I can't get high. And I smoke so much of it, and I smoke a concentrate, and I still can't get high. And then I said, well, did you ever get high? And they said, oh yeah, I had these edibles and knocked me out. And it occurred to me that maybe the receptor that lady had is not properly structured. So THC doesn't bind to that receptor. But 11-oic THC acid, the secondary metabolite of liver, now has a huge intoxicating effect on the person. So, thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. One more time, Dr. Jay-Z. I'm sure he'd be happy to answer more questions in the hallway. I'm sure we're out of time.